Good evening. Coming up next on Connecticut News Tonight, new life for the death penalty in Connecticut as the House votes to toughen the state's current law. We'll have the story coming up.
The only man on death row in the state, serial killer Michael Ross, speaks out tonight in an exclusive interview, blasting prosecutors for his trial.
Also following the real-life drama in tonight's NBC movie, I Know My First Name is Stephen, Cheryl Gray wraps up her report on how to keep your child safe from sexual assault.
And we'll show you how a steak knife in school is causing problems for a Willington student. Scott?
Anthony, some heavy rain falling across parts of Connecticut at this hour, but will it spoil tomorrow's weather? I'll have the answer coming up in less than 5 minutes. Beasley.
The Bulls and Pistons and the Red Sox versus Ken Griffey Jr. Those stories coming up in sports. Joanne?
And Crockett and Tubbs may be gone, but Miami Vice, the computer game, lives on.
All this and much more next on Connecticut News Tonight.
You're watching WVIT. It's 64 degrees.
Live from WVIT, this is Connecticut News Tonight.
Good evening. I'm Joanne Nesti.
And I'm Anthony Everett. Our lead story tonight, Connecticut's death penalty. It may soon be easier to impose. The State House of Representatives tonight passed a measure changing the requirements of the penalty. Requirements that have placed only one person on death row in Connecticut in the last 17 years. That's convicted killer Michael Ross. We'll hear from him in a moment, but first, Lisa Jones with a report on tonight's House debate.
For more than 3 hours, the debate over Connecticut's death penalty raged on at the state capitol. Under the current death penalty law, juries must determine whether there are any aggravating factors that would show the crime was particularly cruel. And if there are, the jury must then decide about mitigating factors or extenuating circumstances such as insanity. If present, even one mitigating factor would prevent the death penalty. Tonight, however, House lawmakers voted 93 to 57 to toughen the current law, making it easier to impose. Under the bill, mitigating circumstances would not only have to exist, but actually outweigh the aggravating circumstances in order for a convicted killer to be spared.
It still is an extremely difficult burden. It's extremely difficult to get the death penalty in the state of Connecticut. But it is more fair for those people we refer to as the victims. They can see the light at the end of the tunnel.
I'm afraid, Madam Speaker, that what we are seeing here today is really a belief that someone must be executed to prove our laws work. I don't believe that's true.
But the measure now must go over to the state Senate, where some say it faces an even tougher battle than it did in the House. In Hartford, Lisa Jones, Connecticut News Tonight.
Now, supporters of the death penalty in Connecticut favor the changes that would make it easier to impose the sentence. Among them, Gary Merton, a member of Survivors of Homicide. That's a self-help group for the family and friends of murder victims.
We want deterrence, especially for police officers. You know, what happens when a person goes into jail and he decides he wants to kill somebody else again? Is it okay? You know, our legislatures keep letting that happen, and it can happen very easily right now. There's too many people in there that have no regard for life.
Merton's daughter was killed in 1983. The defendant, Corey Barton, plea bargained for a manslaughter conviction.
As Anthony mentioned earlier, the only Connecticut man on death row has spoken out for the first time about his conviction in the killing of 6 young women. Michael Ross spoke recently with Connecticut Public Television about the death penalty and other matters. CPTV agreed to let Connecticut News be the first to air part of the interview, which, as John Sablon reports tonight, Ross's lawyer monitored very closely.
With a lawyer sitting off to his left, Michael Ross submitted to the CPTV interview, freely discussing the death penalty and his trial, but not talking about the killing of 6 Connecticut women. Ross has been on death row for 22 months, while he appeals his capital felony murder convictions. In effect, Ross says the state railroaded him, but he adds that the state did not prove its case to God.
He knows what happened. I don't have to convince him of anything because he knows what the truth is. And it certainly is not what State's Attorney C. Robert Sade Jr. or Sr. says.
What is the truth?
He won't let me go into it.
That last "he" was a reference to Ross's lawyer. The main reason Michael Ross was approached by CPTV was for his views on Connecticut's death penalty, and he made a startling revelation.
Even after I was sentenced to death, I believed in the death penalty. I thought it served a purpose, but that was because of my ignorance. I really didn't know anything. It was the same gut-level emotional type thought that I think most people feel, that, you know, there's some people who just deserve to die and they should be executed.
Ross says he came to oppose the death penalty law after he learned it was muddled and unwieldy. Ross added that in spite of what advocates say, capital punishment's effectiveness is highly questionable.
When it's all over and done, even the most premeditated crime, if he sits down and thinks about it, if he gets caught, if he's convicted, if he's sentenced to death and can't avoid it, he may be executed 8-10 years down the line. And I just don't see how that can be a deterrent.
Ross added that the deterrent value of capital punishment is further lessened by a criminal's belief that he'll never get caught. John Sablon, Connecticut News Tonight.
That entire interview with Michael Ross can be seen on Connecticut Public Television tomorrow night at 9 p.m.
Meteorologist Brad Field is off tonight. In fact, he's off for a couple of weeks on his honeymoon in Hawaii. And Scott Dorval joins us now with the first look at Wednesday's forecast. Scott?
Okay, Anthony, I'm sure the weather in Hawaii is much better than it is in western Connecticut tonight. In Hartford, not much rain has fallen, but take a look at this very latest radar. In southwestern Connecticut, some very heavy rain falling in Danbury, down in Bridgeport, and White Plains, New York. That moderate rain is pushing off to the north and to the east. So with this broken precipitation across all of the northeast, I think we'll see an on-again, off-again type precipitation throughout tonight and the first part of tomorrow. As far as tomorrow's forecast goes, it's a good bet we'll see rain in the morning, but it's also a good bet that rain will stop in the mid-morning hours. It'll at least dry out during the afternoon, and there's a chance we could see a peek of the sun during the afternoon. If that's the case, highs tomorrow in the 70s. For the most part, it gets better as the day goes on. Full forecast coming up a little later. Joanne?
All right, Scott, thank you. It's a new day in Beijing in more ways than one as the pro-democracy protest continues, but with less of the tension of recent days. About 10,000 demonstrators remain in Tiananmen Square as martial law continues, but the troops who were positioned on the outskirts of the city have turned back after being stopped for 3 days by the surging crowds. At the White House today, President Bush met for an hour with Chinese Parliament leader Wan Li and said any violence directed at the student demonstrators would jeopardize U.S.-China relations. Li is cutting short his Washington trip to deal with the crisis in Beijing. Bush also wants the Chinese government to stop jamming news broadcasts by the Voice of America. Tomorrow, the president will be visiting the U.S. Coast Guard Academy in New London, where he'll be delivering the commencement address. Today, preparations were underway for the ceremonies and for the presidential visit, including seating for 5,000 people. The Coast Guard cutter Tahoma will also be standing by, having just returned from sea duty in a crackdown on drug smuggling, which the president is expected to note tomorrow. We'll bring you live coverage of the speech starting shortly after 12 noon.
The House Ethics Committee will decide within the next 2 days whether to drop some of the charges against House Speaker Jim Wright. Wright is charged with 69 violations of House rules, including hiding excess speaking fees as book royalties and accepting improper gifts from a friend with interest in legislation. In the first day of hearings today, Wright's attorney said the Speaker is being railroaded out of town without due process and said the charges stem from the Ethics Committee's misinterpretation of House rules.
A 29-year-old New Britain man is being held on $100,000 bond tonight, charged with setting a fire that destroyed part of a West Hartford shopping center. The fire overnight did extensive damage to Andy's Italian Kitchen, a restaurant, and minor damage to a garden shop and florist. The suspect, Teddy Rosiak, is charged with first-degree arson. He faces a court appearance tomorrow morning. A 34-year-old man already charged in a Windsor convenience store robbery is facing similar charges tonight in Cromwell, and other towns may also be investigating him. Jay Howe appeared in Enfield Superior Court today to face the Windsor charges as police in several towns try to determine if he's responsible for a series of convenience store holdups.
Tonight's movie on WVIT, I Know My First Name is Steven, brings to light a dark secret that millions of Americans share. Some researchers believe as many as 40 million people in the U.S. were victims of sexual abuse when they were children. In the final part of her special report, Cheryl Gray explains how to prevent your child from becoming a victim and what to do if it happens.
Puppets are one way children learn about sexual abuse. It's also a technique that provides health care officials and law enforcement agencies with the answers they need to investigate a suspected episode of child molestation.
The child can demonstrate what the experience was like for them, whether clothes were removed.
Barry Baker is a psychiatric social worker for the Community Child Guidance Clinic in Manchester.
It's more important for a parent to teach a child what they're uncomfortable with. Every child has a right to their own personal space and not to be intruded upon.
Communication is key in learning whether your child has been a victim of sexual abuse. When a child comes to you with information that indicates he or she has been abused, listen.
A vigilant parent who's focusing more on protection is really the key here.
Teach your child confidence. They should never hesitate to say no to an adult that may harm them.
I like you, Uncle John, but don't touch me like that. You're my favorite uncle, but this is really strange, what you're asking me to do.
I don't think any child's too young to hear about anything that's dangerous. It's just that we haven't discussed that yet. I'm not really quite sure how.
Be open. It is never too early to tell your child what is and what is not appropriate touching. Be attentive. Learn the signs that could mean your child has been abused.
The key word to describe all that you've just seen is awareness. It's important for you as a parent to be aware of the potential dangers that threaten your child. It's just as important for your child to be aware so that he or she will be prepared for the critical moments when you are not around. In West Hartford, I'm Cheryl Gray, Connecticut News Tonight.
And coming up on Connecticut News Tonight, hundreds of protesters march outside the state capitol today. We'll tell you why.
Are spicy foods really hard on your stomach? Some seasoned advice on today's 60-second house call.
And it looks like a long life for Crockett and Tubbs, not only in reruns, but the Miami Vice crime fighters are also on computer games. Stay tuned.
The streets around the state capitol were filled with protesters today, angry about budget cuts and staff reductions at the Department of Mental Retardation. Hundreds of marchers from the District 1199 Healthcare Workers Union have been demanding for weeks that DMR Commissioner Brian Lensink resign because they say the cuts are affecting patient care. In Middletown, another union of mental health workers was marching as well, workers at Connecticut Valley Hospital, demanding an end to a hiring freeze there that they say has affected patient care. The Connecticut Employees Union Independent, which represents the workers, says their workload has increased, but a number of job openings at CVH have been left unfilled.
If you steer clear of hot and spicy foods because you're afraid of an upset stomach, then you may be sacrificing some foods for no reason. As Dr. Bob Lanier reports tonight, hot and spicy to the mouth doesn't mean trouble for your stomach.
Are you afraid to eat spicy foods because they might give you stomach damage? Well, relax. A new study says that eating spicy foods produces no visibly measurable damage to the mucosal lining of the stomach in normal people. It was an interesting study. They used little tiny television cameras to look at the stomach lining of 12 volunteers who ate 4 different types of meals. One was bland, the second was bland plus 6 aspirin, the third was a spicy Mexican meal, and the fourth a pepperoni pizza. The only meal that actually produced any damage that could be seen was the bland meal with aspirin. This, of course, confirms earlier observations that aspirin with food does not reduce stomach damage. Aspirin, after all, is an acid and a pretty potent medication. It's interesting to note that ground jalapeno peppers produce no damage after 24 hours. That surprised me. It's apparent that we don't know all that goes into making an ulcer. Some scientists think a bacteria called Campylobacter causes it, but the findings aren't conclusive yet. Only aspirin remains as a sure cause. I'm Dr. Bob Lanier.
In the rural community of Willington, there's a new problem: students bringing knives to school. At Hall Memorial School, several students have been caught with switchblades over the past few weeks. One 5th grader, Michael Tardy, has been suspended for 5 days for bringing this kitchen knife to school. That has his parents in an uproar. They say he brought the knife to school to cut his fruit, and they're calling for a review of the school board's policy.
Coming up, the Bulls and Pistons playing Game 2 of their series tonight at the Palace.
And the Red Sox start a 12-game homestand against the Mariners. Beasley Reece with all the night in sports coming up next.
Drive. 60-second house call was brought to you by Mercedes-Benz.